Good afternoon, everyone. It is almost 1 o'clock. It is 1 o'clock. Welcome to the February 20th meeting of the Mountain View Historical Association. My name is Pamela Baird. I'm the president of the board, and I welcome you. We'll get started in just a few minutes, give everybody an opportunity to log in. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nick Perry, past president of the Mountain View Historical Association. For those of you just joining us, we're going to get started in a few minutes. In the meanwhile, feel free to use the chat to say hello. And as we start our presentations in a few minutes, you can use the Q&A function on Zoom to submit questions, and we'll be answering those after each presentation. We will get started in just a couple minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, welcome. I am Pamela Baird. I'm the president of the board of Mountain View Historical Association. We welcome you. Today's program is going to be a little bit different in that we're going to be doing history, current and future of the Stevens Creek and the trail, and the person whose name, although misspelled, was given to the creek. We will have a short presentation about Elijah Stevens, which I will present, and then we will have a presentation after that from Greg Unangst about the history of the creek itself, the trail system, and Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. But first, a word from our sponsor, which is us. Mountain View Historical Association was started in 1954. By a group of individuals who wanted to preserve, protect, research, enhance, and educate people about the history of Mountain View. And we encourage you to become a member, or if your membership has elapsed, please join. You can go to our website and you can join from our website. In addition, we have next Sunday, we have walking tours planned, and we would again invite you to participate. You can sign up on the Eventbrite page for Mountain View Historical Association. Our next presentation probably will be May 1. We don't know the format because we don't know what's going to be happening with COVID. We have found that Zoom has given us a little bit of freedom to do different kinds of presentations. So we're still, we'll be working on that. So in any case, I will go ahead and get started. Do we pretty much have everybody online, Nick?
Ready to go.
Okay, all right. I am going to share my screen. Oh, wait, yeah. Let's stop again. Let's try that from the beginning. Sorry about that. We had it all queued up and I don't know why it's not coming up. Technical difficulties. I had it all queued up. Oh, sorry about that, folks. We are going to back up here a minute. No, I guess we are not. We even practiced that this morning. Okay, let's try one more time. Oh, this is embarrassing. Jeez. Oh, let's see what happens now. Well, I can't even find my screen here. I disappeared. Well, Nick, how'd you like to?
Backup plan, Pam?
Yes.
All right, backup plan it is. Thanks everyone for bearing with us 1 second while we implement our backup plan. All right, Pam, just say when and I'll advance the slide for you.
Okay, great. So Elijah Stevens gave his name, or his name was taken for Stevens Creek Trail. Somewhere along the line, the name got misspelled. Next slide. I didn't grow up here, so I never learned anything about Elijah Stevens, and I was absolutely amazed when I started researching him, what a colorful life he led, and what a wonderful contribution he and others made to the history of California. He was born in South Carolina in 1804, moved to Georgia with his family at a young age. Little is known of his early life. Next slide. During the 1820s and 30s, he evidently participated as a free trapper in the fur trade along the Missouri River. This was a blossoming industry for 2 decades. Next. Beaver pelts were used to make men's and women's hats in the United States and Europe. When the beaver population collapsed and silk hats became fashionable, trappers needed to find other means of making a living. Next. The first known records show Stevens employed by the Potawatomi Indian Sub-Agency in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which was administered by the federal government. The agency was established in 1837 when the tribe was forced to move from the Chicago area. The outpost had a succession of agents in charge of the sometimes chaotic outpost. Stevens worked as a blacksmith there for several years in the early 1840s. Next. Because of the trappers, next slide, please. Because of the trappers' knowledge of the Mountain West, some of them became guides for the wagon trains heading to Oregon. In 1877, Stevens resigned his position and bought and outfitted a wagon with his severance pay. He joined a wagon train heading to Alta California, which then was a part of Mexico. Next. This endeavor, back up there, okay. This endeavor had only been attempted twice before, both of which faced extreme hardship and were not successful. The distance between Council Bluffs and Sacramento is over 2,000 miles. Next slide. This train became known as the Stevens-Townsend-Murphy Party. Stevens was elected to serve as the captain. The wagon train consisted of 11 ox-drawn wagons carrying about 50 people. The extended family of Martin Murphy Sr. contained 23 members. The Murphy family was seeking religious and economic opportunities after emigrating from Ireland to Canada and then to Missouri. It was there that 4 members of the family died of malaria, confirming that they needed to move yet again. Next slide. 10 families left Council Bluffs on or about May 24th, 1844. They proceeded on a route along the north bank of the Platte River, reaching Independence Rock in central Wyoming just before the 4th of July. And the reason it was called Independence Rock was because for the wagon trains, if you could make it to Independence Rock by the 4th of July, then you had a pretty good chance of making it to Oregon before the snows came. Next slide. The group then headed mostly west. The trail split in central Oregon, with the Oregon Trail going up to the north. The group headed mostly west into unknown territory. The train proceeded west now, which is now Nevada, where they encountered an old Paiute Indian chief who instructed them about a river that could take them to the west. When the group located the river, they named it Truckee for the Indian. This route took them up over into the River Canyon to Truckee Lake, which is now called Donner Lake. Next slide. The snowpack by then was getting difficult to navigate. On November 14th, a decision was made to split the group. Again, this is after they've been traveling for almost 7 months. 6 members headed west on horseback to Sutter's Fort to get fresh supplies and animals. 6 wagons were left behind at Donner with 3 men to watch them. A small cabin was built, which would be used 2 years later by the ill-fated Donner Party. Next slide. The remaining 5 wagons were pulled uphill through 2 feet of snow with steep inclines where the wagons were double hitched with the oxen. On November 25th, 1844, Elisha Stevens led the group as it crossed the summit of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Next slide. The group continued on along the South Fork of the Yuba River, where they were forced to create a survival camp because of exhaustion and deep snow. It was decided again that a portion of the group needed to go to Sutter's Fort for supplies and help. This group left on December 6th, leaving the women and children and several men behind. About the end of February 1844, the rescue group finally arrived. Next slide. By then, the survivors were eating boiled hides as the food supply was depleted. The group reached Sutter's Fort over a week later. And here is a marker erected in 1994 heralding and the route and where they camped nearby. Next slide. It wasn't until the June of 1845 that the remaining wagons at Donner Lake were retrieved, and this painting by a local artist, Andrew Hill of San Jose, shows an idealist crossing up over Donner again. This expedition was noteworthy on several accounts. Finding new routes west, the first wagon trains to succeed in bringing wagons over the mountains, the first cattle brought over the Sierra Nevadas into California, and no deaths along the way. It is also noteworthy for the people who traveled on the train. Next slide. The gold country town of Murphys was named for two of the Murphy sons. Martin Murphy Jr., shown here on the right, settled in Santa Clara Valley, where he purchased large amounts of land for farming and ranching. A portion of his land in Sunnyvale would become the train station and the town. Dr. Townsend would become the first licensed physician in California. He briefly was the mayor of San Francisco, and a street was named for him. He and his wife died in 1850 treating patients of a cholera outbreak in San Jose. Next slide. A documentary about the wagon train called Forgotten Journey was produced in 2001. It can be ordered from the website shown for $19.95. When Stevens reached Sutter's Fort with the survivors, he and some of the others were conscripted to serve in the lead up to the Bear Flag Revolt. From 1846 to 1848, Stevens acted as an ordnance blacksmith in San Diego during the Mexican-American War, for which he would later receive a pension. Next slide. Afterwards, he settled in West Side, which became called Cupertino. Oops, yeah. In 1848, he settled on 160 acres along the Arroyo de Cupertino, which was later named Stevens Creek. And as you can see here, it's called Stevens Creek spelled correctly, and it's also titled Cupertino Creek. Stevens called the land Blackberry Farm. Here he hunted game, fished, raised grapes and blackberries, and planted fruit trees. Next slide. In addition, Stevens hunted rattlesnakes, evidently his favorite food. Supposedly, he claimed, quote, "You don't know what's good. Rattlesnakes beat frog legs all to pieces," end quote. The Mountain View Register carried an article about his rattlesnake ragout. His neighbor, Frank Grant of Brant Road, would decline his invitations for dinner because evidently he served rattlesnake as a regular part of his dinner. In 1859, Stevens added another 155 acres from the Rancho San Antonio land grant, and as you saw that on the previous slide. However, when he realized more people were settling in the valley and that the Union Pacific Railroad would soon arrive, he decided to leave. He sold, next slide, he sold his land to George McCulley and William McClelland. Supposedly, he said that the area had become, quote, too darn civilized. There is a marker for Stevens located in the Blackberry Farms golf course parking lot. Next slide. About 1864, he moved near Bakersfield in Kern County, an area he had traveled to before when he went to San Diego. He purchased 40 acres where he raised bees and chickens and became a respected member of the small community. Next slide. The local paper described his travels to and from San Diego in 1872. Evidently, family members joined him in Bakersfield as he was a witness to his niece's wedding in 1876. An article in 1877 described his innovations in designing beehives, and a long obituary was published upon his death in 1887, when he suffered a stroke and died several months later. Stevens was buried locally, and he never married. Next slide. In 1990, a marker for his gravesite in Bakersfield was erected, and the historical marker was placed near the location of his original house. The explorer John C. Fremont made famous the route the wagon trail had discovered. Quote, "Yes, he found the path I made," end quote. Stevens would barely recall. Next slide. He finally received proper recognition in 1994 when a mountain near Donner Lake was finally named for him. Next slide. And thus ends the fascinating story of a man whose accomplishments leading a pioneering group of settlers to California has mostly been forgotten. And that ends my presentation. If we have any questions, I can entertain those now.
No questions in the Q&A at the moment, Pam, but folks, if
Okay,
you
all
have
right,
any,
then that means I did a good job of explaining the subject matter, right? Okay, we will next have our next presenter, who is Greg Unangst, who happens to be my husband, but that's not why he's here. Greg is a graduate of West Point. He spent 10 years on active duty and 18 years in the reserves. He ultimately retired as a lieutenant colonel. He received a BS in engineering from West Point and earned a MS in electrical engineering and an MBA both at University of Pennsylvania. And he also has a master's in public policy from NYU. He worked in the aerospace industry for 33 years, Lockheed and Loral and Ford Aerospace were his previous companies, and retired in 2011. And since then, he has joined the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail Board and was elected president last year. He's also the co-chair of the Restoration Advisory Board at Moffett Federal Field and is County Roads Commissioner. And with saying that, we will go ahead and let Greg start his program.
Well, thanks, Pam. I am going to try and hopefully do better than you on my screen sharing effort here. Let's see if we can get this to go. Okay. All right, can everybody see that?
Greg, we're seeing your PowerPoint, not the, so try share screen again, hitting the button and hitting the full screen version.
Okay, yeah. Anything happen there?
No, we're still seeing the PowerPoint version. Hit the share screen button on Zoom.
Yep.
There we go. We're good.
Okay. So yes, as Pam said, I'm Greg Unangst. I'm recently elected president of the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. I've been a member of the Friends since 2011, when I actually early 2012, right after I retired from Lockheed. So I'm going to be discussing Stevens Creek, the creek itself, the trail, and the wildlife corridor, as well as some of the history of how the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail got started. So, it's a little early history of the creek itself. The area around Stevens Creek was populated by the Ohlone Indians for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and they did camp near the creek and foraged for berries, fish, and game. They lived, and I should mention that the area that we live in now is much different back then, prior to the developing the valley into agricultural area. But it was much lusher than it is now. The Spanish, when they came through, they noted that it was a difficult area to navigate through because of the many creeks that they had to cross to get to where they needed to go, and that there was very abundant game and fruit trees and berries and fish in the streams. So the Ohlone were basically hunter-gatherers, and we're not farmers in any way. The environment that he lived in was capable of supporting a good number of people without any necessity of storing food or developing farmland. And in 1775, 76, the Spanish down in Mexico noted that the Russians and the British were up further to the north and were coming down through what is now called British Columbia and into Northern California, and they decided to send an expedition up, try and begin populating Northern California, or more accurately, Central California. And so they started this expedition with under De Anza in 1775, 76, with the hope of establishing a number of missions and army forts along the way. So part of that, in 1775, they departed with a party of about 240 people and headed north, and they came basically from the central part of Mexico up to through Arizona, through where Tucson is, and crossed the Colorado River near Yuma, Arizona, having to deal with the Indians there, and basically worked out some agreements with the Indians, allowing them to cross the Colorado River. They proceeded up through Monterey, and that's where a good number of the settlers stayed, is in Monterey to populate that area. And a smaller group continued on to the north, reaching Santa Clara, what is now called Santa Clara, area, to establish a mission there. And then they proceeded on north to try and make it up to San Francisco, which at that point, no Spaniard had ever made it overland to that point. But they stopped at Arroyo San Jose de Cupertino, as they call it. And I have a quote here from Father Pedro Font, who was the cartographer and scribe, I guess, for the expedition. And he basically said that this Arroyo San Jose de Cupertino, which is useful only for travelers, we halted here for the night, having come eight leagues in 7.5 hours, which is about 24 miles, which is pretty good for horseback in one day. And from this place, we have seen on our right the estuary that runs from the port of San Francisco. And this is basically one of the first times that they actually saw that there was a large bay south of San Francisco. And they continued on. 3 days later, they were up in they made it to San Francisco and sighted the area for the Mission Dolores, what became known as Mission Dolores, and the Presidio of San Francisco. And they proceeded the expedition back down south. In 1848, as Pam noted, this person, amazing person, Elias Stevens, purchased 160 acres along the creek and started Blackberry Farms. Probably because there was an abundant blackberry thickets in the area. And over time, both the creek and the road that connected his farm to the mission in Santa Clara became known as Stevens Creek. It was easy for the English to say that, English-speaking or Europeans to say that, as opposed to Arroyo de San Jose de Cupertino. And then somewhere along the way, as Pam mentioned, it got misspelled, and which stuck. So now it's called Stevens, spelled with a V. In 1924, the Santa Clara County purchased 400 acres upstream from Blackberry Farms to build a dam, and they continued to acquire land and then opened a county park in 1956. Just south of where Blackberry Farms is. And we'll be talking about that a bit further. Let me go to the next slide. So this is a map of the creeks in northwestern Santa Clara County. the era before Europeans showed up in this area, started to populate this area. You can see that the creeks really never made it as creeks into the bay. Now, one exception up there is San Francisco Creek, which did actually make it to the bay, but most of the creeks in the area sort of petered out. It went into a great marshland that, and tidal marsh that was in the area, just very shallow water of the South Bay. And that would change once the Europeans showed up. So the creek was being modified as soon as Europeans were in the area, about 1840s, 1850s. And it was basically to control the creek as to where it went and how it flowed, and to gain access to the bay, make it suitable for shipping agricultural goods between the South Bay and San Francisco. Needed access to that. And then at the same time, in the shallow waters of the bay, people were already building salt ponds in the 1850s, and that has continued to this day, where there still is some salt manufacturing going on in the East Bay, in the southern East Bay. You can see it from Shoreline Park. If you look across the bay, far across the bay, you can see the salt piles on the east side of the bay. In the 1950s, I should say for most of the early part of the last century, this area we lived in was a agricultural area with numerous grazing fields, grain fields, fruit trees, and fruit processing plants. And in the 50s, after World War II, there was a massive urban development going on. For example, right across the street from where I live, the Mauna Loma area was built between 1953 and 1957. A few thousand houses were built in that area. And it changed the landscape of the region, in the sense that it went from agricultural to urban in a very short period of time, and there was flooding that happens with these creeks, and both Permanente and Stevens Creek experienced major flooding in the years 1862, 1911, et cetera, that I have there. You notice that in the 40s and 50s, the frequency of floods increased. And the reason for that is not because it got wetter all of a sudden, because the ground changed. By urbanization of the area, there was a substantially more concrete, asphalt, macadam that was impervious to water, and changed the profile of floods that would spike after a rainfall. The water would spike upward, and then quickly, you hope quickly drain out to the bay, as opposed to in more agricultural areas, the water would seep into the ground and gradually seep into the creeks over a longer period of time, attenuating the peaks and the valleys, so to speak. One of the major infrastructure projects that was done was the Permanente Creek Diversion Channel in 1959, which connected Permanente Creek and Stevens Creek watersheds. And also at the same time, there was significant channelization of the creeks. In the case of Permanente Creek, the wildlife corridor that did exist at that time was completely destroyed by the concrete channels that were placed to in the name of flood control. And many of the creeks in the bay, excuse me, I can drink of water here. Yeah. Many of the creeks in the area suffered the same channelization with concrete drainage structures that supposedly help the flow of water out to the bay. For whatever reason, Stevens Creek was left mostly natural, and I say that mostly, but it still has numerous barriers to fish migration and spawning, and still has some concrete drainage structures in the bay, in the creek bed, particularly where road goes underneath roads and such. Anyway, here is a map of about 1876 or so, where you can see, let's see, I'll get my cursor here. This is Stevens Creek right here. This is Permanente Creek. You can see that they actually go out to the bay, which was done by human effort. And right up here is Ringsdorf's landing, where he constructed not only Sterling Road, which is right here, which goes to down, what was then downtown, well, it still is downtown Mountain View, out to the bay, and he was able to then load two-masted schooners to go up to San Francisco with agricultural goods, both hay and fruit and vegetables and eggs and whatnot were shipped up into the San Francisco Bay, up to San Francisco. This is what downtown Mountain View, and you can see that it's been, even at that point, it was laid out with streets, small streets, and those streets are still there. The Sterling Road is now, of course, shoreline, and it's still basically in the same area. Charleston Road is over here. There's what they call a private road that eventually became San Antonio down here, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the railroad tracks. You can see the railroad tracks coming across the map here. Now, this is a picture, an aerial photograph at 1948. And here is this road right here is Middlefield. And Middlefield was named Middlefield because it went through the middle of the field. And you can see that's exactly what it was doing here. This is all agricultural land right here, all through here. And down in this area, over Richmond Station, and all this stuff was agricultural areas. Now, Moffett Field had only one runway at the time. It now has two. The Ringsdorf property is up this way. I should say way up here. And you can see the red here is what they call over here this listing here. It says this is the red is engineered channels. So basically, there's levees built along Stevens Creek from basically just south of 101 up to the bay. There's a few other spots down here, and if you look over here at Permanente Creek, it's all red. It's all concrete channels that were built. This is 1948, and let's go to the next one. Now this is a picture of somewhat the same area further south. It shows complete urbanization of the area that's going on. And this is the this red line across the middle of the thing is the Permanente Creek, Permanente diversion channel that connects Permanente Creek with Stevens Creek. And it was done again for shifting the flood waters from Permanente Creek over to Stevens Creek, which I guess the engineers thought it could handle the load of the water better. And it basically destroys the fish passage ability of Permanente Creek. Although there are still fish there, but they can't, there's no way well, I should say it's very difficult for them to get down out to the bay. And as we'll talk later, there are some barriers on Stevens Creek, but fewer. there's fewer of them and less severe than is at Permanente Creek. Okay. So changing a little bit, the subjects a little bit, the County of Santa Clara had a general plan that was done in 1960, and this brochure from 1961 shows what was a fantasy or a dream of a string of pearls, as it was called in some cases, of utilizing the creeks as linear parks, and having a path between them that could tie, as it says down here, parks tied together along the street side park chain will be a maximum benefit to the crowded urban population expected to live in the valley floor in the future years. That will the crowded urban population did come to fruition, but the trail and the string of parks was a little more difficult. But it was as early as the 60s that people were envisioning utilizing the creeks in the Santa Clara Valley for linear parks. One interesting thing over here on the left-hand side is that they envisioned a Bayside expressway that would go out into the Baylands and basically cut off the population from the bay by a major freeway, but that never happened, fortunately. So the Friends of Stevens Creek, why and where did it come from and how did it come to be? And how did we get to where we are with this beautiful trail system that we have in Mountain View? And basically based on that vision that was stated by the county back in the 60s, Mountain View came up with in 1991 with a feasibility report. And in that report was a 6-mile trail within the city in 5 reaches, which, by the way, has pretty much come to fruition, has actually happened. But in 1991, they actually paved the first 1.5 miles of levee out by Shoreline Park, what would become Shoreline Park. And this was the start of Stevens Creek Trail. Now, in late 91, Rhonda Farrar noticed that there needed to be somebody that was basically trying to get this trail built from the bay to the mountains and trying to realize this dream that was first stated in the 60s. And she basically wrote a plan, had her initial meeting in 92, and eventually achieved 501c3 nonprofit status in March of 93. She pulled together a very talented group of people to be the first board of directors of the, with Rhonda as the chair, and she was a former EPC member. Sally McLeod was a lawyer who was instrumental in getting the 501c3 status established. Joan Rogers, CPA, got the books and the financing going. Bena Del Norte was a expert in communications and marketing and how to get the word out that there was such a thing called the Stevens Creek Trail, and that it was a long-term project to build it through the city. And then Art Takahara, who many of you know, or some of you may know, was a city council member, and he was instrumental in getting funding and getting the council behind this effort of building a trail system in the city. And a critical individual was Glenn Lyles, who was Mountain View City staff, and he was the driving force to getting this first trail segment built. And started the process of building out the trail, which I'll get to that in a minute, how long that took. But all four cities that are along the trail were briefed on a plan to build the trail through each of the cities up into the hills above Cupertino and connect with the county trails on the other side of Skyline Boulevard up in the hills. All four cities expressed initial support for the trail, but only Mountain View actually moved out and did something. So the mission or the objective of Friends of Stevens Creek Trail is to promote community pride and involvement in the completion, enhancement, and enjoyment of the Stevens Creek Trail and Wildlife Corridor. And the completion means from the bay up until the headwaters up near Skyline Boulevard and Page Mill Road is where the creek actually starts, and they actually have a trail built up as far as that. And I wanted to show you this map. This map was just, when I first saw this map, it took my breath away. It shows the totality of what we're trying to do and pretty close to where we are now. So that heavy green line right up here is the 5 or so miles within Mountain View that has been completed. We connect with the Bay Trail up by the bay that goes, I forget how many miles around the bay, 300 and some miles around the bay. Eventually, I think 2/3 of that is built. And just as an aside, the South Bay Salt Ponds project, rebuilding the salt ponds, we'll extend the Stevens Creek Trail 1.1 miles out into the bay with an observation deck at the end of that. That'll be the new start of the Stevens Creek Trail. Will be actually out in the bay. Coming down here, down to the other end of this is where the trail in Mountain View currently ends at Dale Heatherstone. And we have a project in work to build another 3/4 of a mile down into Sunnyvale, actually ending at Remington in Sunnyvale, and then with a bridge back across the creek over to the high school. Now, Sunnyvale has stepped up and started to get motivated to actually do something on Stevens Creek Trail. For a number of years, they actually had an ordinance in Sunnyvale not to build any trails in the city. And that was fortunately overturned and revoked about 5-6 years ago, where they actually now are starting to work on the detailed design, getting from Remington down to Fremont Avenue. We have about a 3-mile gap here, which is going to be difficult to bridge, so to speak, or tunnel under, whatever. 280 is a very formidable obstacle barrier to the trail, but where the creek goes underneath 280, there's also a tunnel by the side of that. There's 2 tunnels, I should say. One carries the creek, the other one carries a service road. And that's a potential way of getting through 280 and down further south. We did do a number of friends had a walk through in that area. We're now starting to work with the water district to get access to the north end, see what we can do there to get the creek, I should say the trail through 280 into the area south. Cupertino has come up in the last decade or so as a major activity. Building the trail, they have about a mile from going from Stevens Creek Boulevard down to McClellan Ranch Road. We recently just opened another 1/3 of a mile or so that goes down to the Vista Park. That has yet to be paved, but the trail is there, and it is suitable for walking, and possibly some mountain bikes could possibly bicycle there. And that leaves about a mile gap between Linda Vista Park and the Santa Clara County Park up, I should say down south of that. We're now working with the Deep Cliff Golf Course, which I'll talk about in a bit, to ferret out where the boundaries are, where the who owns which property and where, and the possible way of getting through that area, making that connection there, where we'd have a connection down to the county park, Stevens Creek County Park, just south with the reservoir and the dam and so forth. And then we are now talking with Mid-Peninsula Open Space District. And I believe I should mention that Tony Look Trail in the county park area here has been designated as part of Stevens Creek Trail. 4 miles or so of the ridge of the I was going to say here, get my terminology right. It's not Stevens Creek, it's Stevens Canyon Trail. 4 miles of that Stevens Canyon Trail here is going to be designated as part of Stevens Creek Trail. So things are starting to come together, actually, in our objective of the trail from the bay to the ridge trail is you can see it happening. You can actually see it happening and possibly coming together. So here's the history of Mountain View. And I mentioned earlier that they had a plan back in 1991 of 5 reaches. We've got basically, won't go through all this, but they've been step by step, decade by decade, we've been building the trail 1/10 of a mile by 1/10 of a mile in some cases. And the last thing that needs to be done in Mountain View is the area from Dale Heatherstone down to Remington and back over to the high school. And that's the detailed design will start this summer for that in this year. And hopefully we'll see some construction starting a couple of years after that. Now, once that happens, the trail will be essentially complete in Mountain View, but there are a number of things that are going on that will improve the access to the trail. The Ameswell Hotel is trying to negotiate with the Water District to build a bridge just south of 101 across the creek so they can connect their property directly to the creek and the trail on the other side of the creek. Google is also just north of 101 is working to build a bike pedestrian bridge to connect the west side with the east in the west side of North Bayshore. I should say, let me rephrase that. The east side of North Bayshore needs to connect with with Moffett Field. That's as I said, Google is in the process of negotiating that with the Army and Moffett Field and the Water District to build that short bridge over the creek just north of 101. And so there'll be small improvements here and there along Mountain View along the trail to improve access and improve safety in the area. Okay, going on to Cupertino. Cupertino did a feasibility study in 2002. I'll let you read through some of this stuff here. Recently, we, as I said, connected the trail with Linda Vista Park, which is south of McClellan Ranch Road, about 7/10 of a mile. That was just in June of last year. And we are now actively working with Deep Cliff Golf Course to find a pathway to connect with Stevens Creek County Park. And that which would then connect us with the Tony Look Trail, which will then put us in position to connect with the Stevens Canyon Trail. So things are happening. And just this is just an extract of the Mid-Peninsula Open Space Districts plan that they issued, I think it was in 2010 or so, with a measure AA bond measure for improvements to the regional park systems. And 2 of those 25 projects have to do with Stevens Creek Trail. Number 12 here is for the what they call the mid-peninsula or middle section of the Stevens Creek Trail. And this is the area between Linda Vista Park and the county park, Stevens Creek County Park. And then above the dam is this project over here, which is 17, which is then taking it up further up into past Stevens County Park and into the bridge up to the Ridge Trail. So we are actively working with the Mid-Peninsula Open Space Trust for that. And just keeping some of the projects we got going, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. We're working with all the jurisdictions along the trail to gain common signage. And this one advantage or side benefit of this effort has been to bring together all the parties, jurisdictions that are touch the trail and have a bit of the trail in their jurisdiction. They've come together as a relatively cohesive unit and working together to pull this together and developing common signs. So you'll start seeing these little medallions about 6 inches across or so around designating what you're on as part of the Stevens Creek Trail. Very similar to what's happening with the Bay Trail and the Ridge Trail, where they have a common medallion that designates that as part of the network. We're also working with a number of bodies about trying to improve fish passage. We started back in 2015, partnering with the Santa Clara County Creeks Coalition, that's SCCCC, to remediate steelhead trout, steelhead steelhead salmon, I should say, and trout. They're basically the same fish, same species of fish. Trying to eliminate the barriers that have been put up in the name of flood control or whatever along the creek. We identified 8 potential barriers that could be remediated along Stevens Creek, and we picked out one to do ourselves. The Friends will, and this is in the golf course. And this map here shows these eight different barriers to fish passage that we're trying to work with the water district. And there's one up here, the Hetch pipeline, that's actually San Francisco Utilities Commission, Public Utilities Commission as one of the responsibilities of this structure here. But this one here is it's a old concrete submerged concrete vehicular crossing in the golf course. It's no longer used, and we're trying to remove that. Of course, we have to go work through all these agencies, Army Corps of Engineers. There was a curveball late in the game by having to require a historical analysis to make sure we weren't disturbing any Ohlone Indian artifacts or anything like that. So that added some cost and some time to our schedule. So right now we've got all the permits we think we need to start construction in the fall of this year to remove this barrier to fish passage. Just wanted to mention the fact that we have some recurring events that go on. We are this year, I think it's our 28th, I think 27th running of the Trailblazer race. Usually the last Sunday in September. We've done the last 2 years as virtual races. Hopefully this year we'll be able to do it again in real. We're discussing with Microsoft with their new campus about how we can utilize some of their facilities to have a start and finish at their location, but we'll see that more to follow on that. We'll see how that develops. And also we have historically done cleanups on the trail, usually in April of every year. This year it's April 23rd. The last 2 years we did not have these because of the COVID pandemic. And also because of that, we couldn't do our native plant revegetation that we do with Actera, where we team with them to actually, we end up buying the plants and help financially do that. But hopefully we'll be resuming those in the near future. And that's all I have. With any nonprofit in the area, we are looking for new board members. We're looking for volunteers. We're looking for donations. I want to leave this up here for a few seconds to show you how to get in contact. Rajiv Mathur is our executive director, and you can reach him at any of those ways, with the email, with a phone call, or Facebook and Twitter. So I'll be entertaining any questions that anybody might have.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm on camera now, Nick Perry, past president of the Historical Association, and I'll be moderating the Q&A. And Greg, Pam, thank you so much for your presentations. And we do have a few good questions for you, Greg, and maybe some will trickle in for Pamela and her great presentation on Mr. Stevens. So the first question we've got, Greg, is the connector between Permanente and Stevens Creek below ground or above ground?
Well, it depends on what you mean by below ground. It's visible, but it's below the grade of the street level. So it's about that thing is about 50 feet wide and about 10 feet deep. It's a concrete structure that goes continuously about 1.3 miles from basically what is it, Montecito over to Highway 85. It diverts.
Great, thanks. Oh, good.
Yeah, just a couple little more factoids on that. It basically diverts all the water from Permanente Creek into Stevens Creek because of the way the valve is structured. So the water that you see flowing into the creek, into Permanente Creek, closer to 101, is actually coming from Hale Creek, H-A-L-E, which is also another concrete channelized creek that flows and joins Permanente Creek just around McKelvey Park.
Thanks. All right. So our next question is from Vice Mayor Allison Hicks. She says, fabulous. Thank you, Greg. Do you have any prediction regarding when we'll be able to walk our bike to the Stevens Creek Park area that the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District is working on?
Well, there's a couple answers to that. One is that there's in those areas there, Stevens Creek County Park, we're basically adopting, or another way of saying it, they're adopting us on the Tony Look Trail. And the Mid-Penn, that is also an existing trail that goes from basically Page Mill Road, and there's a parking area up and a trailhead up at Page Mill Road, at the end of Page Mill Road, near the end of Page Mill Road. It takes you down county or Stevens Canyon. It's called Stevens Canyon Trail. Now we have to find a better way of getting a more suitable pedestrian and bicycle connection to that, because once you get further down that canyon trail, it turns into a road, a paved road with no shoulders and it's very narrow and very curved and kind of dangerous to walk and bike on. So that'll be a number of years before we get to that. Making predictions about, particularly about the future, is difficult, particularly when you're dealing with these capital projects that they couple together funding from a number of different sources, and then the permitting process is pretty onerous. So anyway, it'll be a number of years, but I think it's going to happen.
Great, fair enough on unpredictability of those types of projects. So we've got a question from Joe in the chat, and he says, during the heavy rains a few months ago, there was still little to no water in Permanente Creek near the bypass at Heritage Oaks Park. Is this due to the cement quarry controlling the water flow? Do you know if they're currently controlling how much water is allowed to flow down Permanente Creek? And thanks.
Well, that's a good question, because what's going on with the quarry is the quarry has got to the point now where they are below the water line. In order to conduct quarrying activities, mining activities, they're continuously pumping water out of the quarry into the creek. And there's been an issue there with selenium, which is a heavy metal. As it leaches through the limestone in the quarry, it picks up selenium, and when you pump that water straight into the creek, you're pumping high toxic levels of selenium for fish and reptiles and whatnot into the creek, and they have been through some remediation issues that have been ongoing for a good number of years. So, and I hope you've heard that Supervisor Simidian is starting a process where we're going to consider buying the quarry from Lehigh and turning it into other uses. So that's another hopeful sign there.
Great, thanks. So we got two questions from Jeff. So I'll read them both because I think they're somewhat related to budget. How can we get an ongoing budget and process for clearing Stevens Creek stream bed of brush and fallen trees? And also the bridges on the creek trail are now getting old enough that they need paint. Is there a provision for that and other ongoing bridge maintenance? What agency has that responsibility?
Yes, so that's the ongoing budget for clearing the stream bed itself. That's the water district. And they do have a budget. They have done some clearing and actually cutting of some trees and stuff that happened just this past year. Some people got upset about that, but they have been doing that. And you could say that they don't do enough, but they have been doing it. And it is their responsibility. So it's the water district that actually owns the stream bed and has that responsibility of maintaining that. And then the painting of the bridges, that's another story. That's Parks and Rec has the Mountain View Parks and Rec has the responsibility over the maintenance of the bridges in the trail itself. However, who ends up doing the work in the end is usually Public Works Department for Mountain View.
All right. So in the chat, we have a question from Lisa. Can you talk about the bridges along Stevens Creek Trail and the Mary Avenue Bridge over 280? Noting that the Mary Avenue Bridge looks really nice and wondering how it was all funded.
I believe you're talking about the Burnett Bridge, I think it's called. Well, it's near Mary Avenue, yeah. So it's probably the one. That's down in Cupertino, and I'm not sure how that was built. It's on the other side of 85. And we looked at that as a way of extending the trail, but then once you do that, you're on the wrong side of 85 and Stevens Creek Boulevard. And that intersection there is a pretty daunting intersection for bikes and pedestrians. So that's a very difficult way to go. So we really haven't looked at that closely at the trail. It's a beautiful thing. It Bridge is a beautiful thing to look at. However, it's not that heavily used. It's was built primarily, from my understanding, is to get high schoolers to Homestead High School.
Got it. All right. So I think the next question is for Pam or for me, from Vice Mayor Hicks. And she's asking, can you tell us any historical detail on the original old Mountain View at Grant and El Camino and its interaction with Stevens Creek? I can take a first pass at that, Pam, and then Pam, if you have anything to add, please chime in. But I think what's interesting. Okay, so Old Mountain View, for those that don't know, is the original town of Mountain View. You might have saw it on the map that Greg shared earlier. It was centered around a stagecoach stop that was founded right around the gold rush, and that's the origins of Mountain View. It was right near where El Camino crosses Stevens Creek. And I don't know for certain, but there's some speculation that maybe that was a great place to stop because you had to ford the creek. Maybe it was a great place to rest near the water and near the shade that was covered by oaks at that time. There's also an interesting story that we've actually been talking a lot about with the Los Altos History Museum, who's Elizabeth is here from that organization, and they're updating their exhibits to focus on creeks. There's a great story about Permanente Creek. And at some point in the 1850s, the creek had been diverted, or sometime at unknown time. It was diverted off of its original stream bank and ended up going down what would become Castro Street. And there was some, really big floods in the late 1800s where the creek was actually going down the middle of what was becoming the town's new main street. And there was actually some tragic deaths that occurred with children that finally got the townspeople to divert it back towards where it runs today. So these creeks have kind of moved around over history. Their natural banks aren't what they appear to be today. Anything to add, Pam?
Just to the last story that you talk about, the creek diversion. I understand it was a couple of farmers didn't like the way the water flowed onto their fields. So they took it upon themselves to re-engineer the stream bed. And then when that flooding occurred, then they were strongly encouraged to let it go back to its original, which was probably already altered, stream bed so that it wouldn't flood downtown.
All right, so more questions are coming in. Keep them coming, folks. We're loving this. Thank you for submitting your questions and sticking with us today. So let's see. So Elizabeth asks, has Friends of Stevens Creek Trail ever purchased land along the creek?
The answer is no. We don't have the level of resources to do that. Even if we could, I'm not sure what we would do with it then, because then you have ongoing responsibility of maintenance and whatnot. But the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail don't build trails. Should have mentioned that. We are basically cheerleaders for the trail. We organize. One of our major assets that we have is a mailing list, an emailing list of about 5,000 people. And we have be able to sort it by city where people live. And when something is coming up on a trail before a city council, say Sunnyvale or Cupertino, we're able to get people out to write letters and go to the council meetings and speak and advocating for the trail. Because whenever you do something, what we found is whenever you're trying to do something to build a trail, there's always somebody against it. As they say, the NIMBY, not in my backyard. I love these trails, but not in my backyard. So we were able to get that out, and I'd say encourage these city councils to stand up to the people that are screaming at them not to build a trail in their neighborhood. And it takes quite a bit of political will to do that. Unfortunately, that is getting to happen pretty much on all four of I'll say 3 of the cities. We still have a problem, in one city I won't mention.
All right, 2 related questions from Jamil and from Robert. I'm going to read them both. So, is the City of Mountain View Trail Ambassador Program still active? And if it is, he advocates please consider becoming a trail ambassador to protect our trails. And then Robert asks, has there been any more discussion about trail safety, in particular, avoiding collisions between pedestrians and cyclists?
Well, the answer is the Trail Ambassador program, from my understanding, is in advance because of the COVID. And when and if the city's going to restart that, I don't know. I have not. I have my T-shirt and cap as a trail ambassador, but I haven't been able to do that lately.
Greg, I'm going to interrupt you. Why don't you explain what the Trail Ambassador program is? I know Jamil's a member as well.
Yeah, the Trail Ambassador program was started by the city of Mountain View as in an attempt to do what Robert Cox's question had to do with the problem we're having with, how should I say this, to overstate the situation, aggressive, belligerent bicyclists mixing it up with clueless, oblivious pedestrians wandering about the trail. So yeah, we have had some issues with that, and a number of issues with that, and there have actually been some collisions. There's some pinch points on the trail which we're trying to figure out how to fix. The undercrossing under 101 is notorious of being dark and narrow. At any rate, people are aware of the problem. There's been discussions with the police department about enforcement of the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. I don't think anything's been done, but as far as the ambassador situation goes, hopefully they're going to basically, I just read a note here. They're going to re-invoke the ambassador program and restart that again. We'll probably have to go through all the training again and get refreshed on that stuff before they start that up again.
Great. So we got one question from Councilmember Showalter. When was the creek extended to the bay?
Yeah. I would guess it was in the 1870s, 60s, 70s. It was here, Rengsdorf actually was probably behind doing that so he could use that as a launching point for his schooners that would go up to San Francisco with his agricultural goods. So yeah, there was a lot of activity in the late 1800s about, as Pam described, farmers moving the channels around to better water their fields or not water their fields or not flood their fields. And at the same time, building roads out into the bay to get access to the shipping that they could do from San Francisco Bay up to San Francisco. So there was a lot of activity there.
Great, thanks, Greg. And we actually do have Rhonda Sherber, sorry for saying your name wrong, Rhonda Farrar, who is the founder of the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. And she's agreed at the last minute to share a few words about her early memories of joining the Friends and getting that started. So Rhonda, thanks for joining us last minute. Make sure you're unmuted, and we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that history.
Oh, well, thanks very much for the kind invitation, and my compliments to Greg for doing such an outstanding job of describing the history of the thinking behind the trail, the progress, and the maps were absolutely fantastic. There were maps in that presentation that I haven't seen before. I really enjoyed seeing that. So I don't know what else I could really add. It's aside from the fact that it's hard to believe it's been 30 years since we started this. And I definitely have a few more gray hairs now than I did at the very beginning. I also would be happy to answer any questions that you have, but I think the presentations have been just outstanding. It was really lovely to hear more about Captain Elijah Stevens, and also really enjoyed Greg's presentation and his leadership of the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. We're very lucky to have him as our current president.
Thank you, Rhonda. And I'll just, add personally, thank you for all the work you did starting the Friends, growing up in Mountain View. Each segment of the Stevens Creek Trail that opened, I was a teenager at the time, and it just opened up the world to us. Like suddenly we were able to go from my neighborhood near California Street between Ringstorff Park and downtown all the way to the bay. And it was just like an awesome thing to be able to have that as a resource to connect with nature and just, feel safe biking or walking to different parts of Mountain View that had been cut off by freeways and roads. So just an amazing legacy that you built in our city that I really enjoyed. It's one of my favorite things about Mountain View.
That just gives me goose pimples and just really makes my entire day. I have to say that when I started the Friends of Stevens Creek Trail, I had two little kids. My son was 4 and my daughter was 6. And as part of the presentations I would make to the city councils and planning commissions and parks commissions explaining the beauty and potential of 60 acres of open space along the Creek Trail in Mountain View alone, and how that linking all these schools and what potential that could have for the community. I also talked about my children riding their bikes to the high school at some point. And now my children are 34 and 36 years old. And that wasn't an option for them, but I'm excited to see that may very well be a real possibility for the children in Mountain View to be able to ride their bikes to the high school safely, because that is a fantastic experience to be in nature, and especially as we get more crowded and live in such urban environments.
Wonderful. Well, Pamela, I'll turn it back to you.
I'd like to also thank Rhonda. I think Rhonda provided that slide to Greg, or helped him find that slide that with the pearls along the creek bed. It's such a wonderful idea. It's too bad it didn't get put together, but at least there was a vision and people saw that this is something that needed to be saved. And thank you, Rhonda, for putting all that together.
Well, thank you. Well, that's what I just found when I was on the planning commission for the city of Mountain View, when we were working on the general plan. We learned about the fact that this had been envisioned, and Tony Look was one of those visionaries in the early 60s who envisioned these string of pearls. And it was very frustrating for me to see so much time had passed and not really much had happened. And Greg explained the problem very well. It's a problem of political will, because there's a limited number of tax dollars, there's an infinite number of projects and ideas, and getting two people to agree on anything is not easy, and getting people to agree to put a trail potentially in their backyard is a pretty big lift. And so it did require a lot of community involvement and support, which the Friend has been instrumental in helping get people involved. And also that political involvement helps raise the funds that are required. At the time we started this, it was going to be a $100 million project. And I hate to even imagine now how much we've spent so far. But $100 million in those days was a big number by any stretch of the in anybody's perspective. So, and Art Takahara was absolutely instrumental in raising that money, for helping raise that money. He was the guy leading that for the city of Mountain View. He went on the road so many times to Washington and to Sacramento, ringing the bell, taking all the letters that we were writing and in support of the trail, and pushing that forward. So it was a huge effort of a lot of people to make this happen. It took way longer than any of us ever envisioned or imagined, but very exciting every time I come up to the Bay Area to see how much has progressed and to see how many people are enjoying the trail. That's just, lifts my spirits, touches my heart.
Well, I don't see any more questions. So Pamela, Greg, thank you. Pamela, can you close us out?
Sure. Okay, great. Again, thank you everyone for attending. We're real excited to present this idea. And actually, Robert Cox on our board was the one that presented the idea to the board. And we started thinking about, that might be something kind of interesting that we could talk about this. Initially, I thought, what are we going to talk about? But then, like I said, the research that I did on Elisha Stevens, I was amazed about his history. And then Greg actually, even though he's been on the board for a while, he even learned a lot of new things about the trail and its history, and will actually help him guide the board of Stevens Creek Trail in the future. So it was a good expedition for both of us in terms of learning things, and we hope that we were able to give everyone a brief idea of what we learned about the Mr. Stevens and the trail itself. Again, both organizations, we need bodies, we need volunteers, we need money, funds, So in any case, we invite you to join both organizations. And we look forward to presenting additional information in the future. Next Sunday, February 27th, we have walking tours of downtown Mountain View. So please join us with those. You can register through our Facebook page or through our website. And stay tuned for future events, which we hope will be held in person for Mountain View Historical Association, as well as Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. Some more things just appeared at the bottom here. Q&A. Oh, just a thank you from Robert. And what else do we have in the chat? Just some more thank you. Okay. I don't think there's anything that we need to comment. So again, thank you, everyone. The presentation, if you missed it or some of your friends missed it and you tell them how wonderful it is, you can see it on our Facebook page. It will be showing up, right, Nick, on our YouTube channel?
We are streaming live on Facebook right now, and that will be available there. And it's also going to be available, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Yeah,
and you can get to those through our website. And it looks like some more things are popping up. They're little kudos. Well, we thank you. We thank you for all the thank yous. And yeah, okay, great. So anyway, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your attendance and have a nice afternoon. Bye.